to the Polgar Chess University. In this week's lesson, I would like to tell you about something very important and very special, and that is called the stalemate. In some of the previous lessons, I already talked about what a stalemate is. It's a special situation when oftentimes, despite having a huge material advantage on one side, the other side escapes because their king, as well as none of the other pieces, are able to move, while the king is not under direct attack. The game ends in a draw when the game ends with stalemate. Let's get started with our first example. In this position, the game is not a stalemate yet. However, it's a very typical situation when one side, white in this case, is quite on the way to win the game, but can make a blunder, a very bad move, a type of move that I see happen oftentimes with inexperienced players. In this position, for example, if white would play king to g4, trying to get closer to the black king in aiding the white queen to checkmate, the game would end in stalemate. In this position, the black king is not under direct attack, while it cannot move to any of the neighboring squares where it could go to if neither of the white pieces would be where they are at. Also important to remember that the pawn on a5 is unable to move at the same time. The game here would end in a draw. So in a position like this, what white would need to do is go in a little bit in a longer way with the king, play king g3, and then go to f4 and f5 in a slower route, but accomplishing the goal to win the game. It would also be wrong to move the king to h4. As you can see in this case as well, the black king has no legal move. Neither does the black pawn, therefore the endgame would be a draw again. When black draws a game like that, that would be considered a very lucky escape from a lost position. While for white, it would be quite disappointing to draw such a won game being up a whole queen. Remember, be extremely careful when you're ahead. I've seen it so many times when somebody got disappointed because they were up a queen or even more material and ended the game with stalemate. As black, of course, it can give you hope that even in a seemingly totally hopeless position, there are chances if the opponent goes wrong. Okay, let's move on to our next position. Here we go. In this position, the black king has no moves at all, neither does the black pawn. However, in this case, there is a third black piece on the board, the rook on b4. So therefore, if you can imagine that you could get rid of that rook while maintaining the current situation that the black king cannot move, the game would end in a draw, in stalemate. Can you think of a move with the rook that would force white to capture the rook and end the game in stalemate? Well, if you thought of the move rook capturing the pawn on h4, you were correct, because now white has only one legal move, namely to capture the black rook, and now again the black king has no escape. The game ends in a draw. It's important to remember that it is not enough to offer the rook to be captured. For example, rook going to g4, because in this case, white has an option in addition to capturing the rook with the king, which would be a big mistake, because then indeed the game would end in stalemate. After the rook moving to g4, white has numerous options, among them capturing the rook with the queen, and now the black king is not in stalemate because can escape on h7. Or again, going back to the starting position, and after the rook moves to g4, white could make many other moves. Probably the one that wins the easiest is giving a check with the knight, when the only legal move for black is to move the king to h5, and then white can choose to checkmate, whether by capturing the rook or moving the queen to h7. So remember, in the starting position, it was very important not only to offer your opponent to capture your rook, but force him to capture it. And the correct solution was rook takes pawn. Let's move on to a different position, and here we are. In this position, white is up 3 pawns. Normally speaking, in an endgame, an advantage of 3 pawns should guarantee an easy and simple win for white, because one of those pawns are very likely to promote. In addition to the material advantage in this position, white is also threatening to give checkmate in one move. Where? It's right here on the g7 square with the queen. However, if you look carefully, you will notice that the black king, while at the moment not being attacked directly, has no legal moves. So therefore, if you could make your queen disappear and still be on move after it's being captured, the game would end in a draw, in stalemate. So let's see, how can black get rid of his queen? There are several attempts to accomplish that. For example, moving the queen to e8. Not a good idea, because the white queen can capture the black queen with a check, and we know that if a king is in check, then it's for sure not a stalemate. So therefore, this is definitely a wrong way to try to get rid of our queen. Let's look another attempt, moving the queen to g4 with a check. This is almost good, almost. If the king would capture the queen, we would have accomplished our goal, achieving stalemate. Here comes the problem. White can capture also with the queen, and therewith releasing the control of the h7 square, and now the black king can move there, which means this position is not a stalemate, and in fact allow white to give checkmate and win the game. Let's go back again to our starting position. And again, the only correct answer here for black is capturing the pawn on h4 with the queen, not leaving white any other option, any other legal move, but to capture the black queen, and then the game is stalemate, that is a draw, a tie. Again, a very fortunate escape for black. Let's move on to another position when there are no queens on the board. In the position we see in front of us, White has an extra knight, as well as 2 more pawns than black. In addition, White is about to give checkmate with the rook coming to h7. What can Black do about it? Understanding the threat of the checkmate, obviously it's not good enough to capture the pawn on f5, as that would still allow the checkmate with the rook. Again, it's important to notice that the black king that seems to be in so much danger at the same time has no moves at the moment. But remember, it's not enough for your king not being able to move. It's the king as well as none of the other pieces. Well, the pawn cannot move either. So far so good. But we still have a very active and mobile rook that has plenty of moves to go to. If in this position Black would succeed to get rid of his rook and maintaining the situation that the king and the pawn cannot move, again the game would be stalemate. And the way to do it is, again, making a forceful move, not giving White the time to checkmate, because anytime you're in check, you need to answer that. And therefore, there is no time to move your rook and checkmate. Now, if the White king captures the black rook, the game is over, Black succeeded, the game is stalemate. But what happens if the White king decides not to capture the rook and move to h2? Well, then again, the chase continues and the rook moves to the corner. Now, the White king has no escape anymore. The only legal move is to capture the rook, and the game is over. Again, it's stalemate. In our next position, it's a different situation because the black king is not at all in a stalemate position. At the same time, it's not hard to recognize that White is clearly better. White has 3 extra pawns in this queen endgame. That's a major advantage. That means Black should be very happy to escape with a draw and not to lose this game. The good news is, Black has at his disposal a beautiful combination that forces White to capture the black queen and at the same time create a pretty stalemate. And the move is queen to f7 check. Now, if the white queen does not capture the black queen, and moves the king out of the check, for example, then Black will simply capture the white queen. White certainly wouldn't like to see that happen. So the best move White has is to capture the queen. Nevertheless, it's a sad awakening to realize that despite having such a tremendous material advantage, the game just ended in a draw. And let's see the next position, which is a rook endgame where Black is up 4 pawns. That seems like an easy win with the black king being safe. Seems like it's only a matter of technique once these pawns on the queen side start running. But White has a very elegant move to save the game here. It's true, the king is not even in a stalemate position. But White, with one pretty move, can accomplish it all. And the move is rook to g8. Look at that move. It's attacking the rook in the corner. Hey, but what happens if this rook captures our rook? Oh no. Well, it was all in purpose. to get rid of our rook, while at the same time tempt the black rook into a position that will not give a chance for the white king to move. And again, as you can see, now the white king has no legal move, neither does the pawn on h3. Therefore, the game is stalemate, the game is a draw. White again pulled off a lucky escape. In our next example, it's white's turn and black visibly has an overwhelming material advantage, having an extra bishop, knight and 2 pawns. In addition, black is also threatening to give checkmate immediately, coming down with the rook to the first rank. What's important to notice about this position is that the white king at the moment has no legal move. So all white would need to do here is to get rid of his only mobile piece, the only piece that can move, and that is the white rook on e7. Can you think of how to accomplish this the most forceful and best way? The best way to do that is not giving black a choice for real escape. And the correct move is rook capturing the pawn on g7. And now black has only 2 choices. Either capturing the rook, which immediately would result in stalemate, or moving the king out of the check in either direction, when the rook would simply follow the king along the 7th rank. And any moment the king captures the rook, it's stalemate, or if the king keeps walking out of the check, another check comes, and they never end. And remember, once the same exact position, with all the pieces being on the same exact squares, is being reached 3 times, then the game is a draw by repetition, by having the same identical position 3 times in a row, with the same side being on move. Here black has no escape from these checks. Let's move on to our next example, and this is a very important one. White has an extra pawn, but that pawn is actually ready to get promoted immediately in this position. But it's a very tricky one. You, in this case, would not want to promote the pawn to a queen, because that would result in a stalemate. The black king now has no legal moves, and as black has no other pieces on the board, the game would end automatically in a draw. So what should white do in this position? Well, there are 2 good choices. The best one is to under-promote, to promote to the second most valuable piece, that is to the rook. The reason why this is the best choice, because it leaves black only 1 legal move, moving the king to h6, which would allow an immediate checkmate in the corner with the rook. I want to mention though that in the starting position, it's also good enough to win the game to move the king away by a square, leaving the black king a choice of various moves to go to, and after any of them, the white pawn can already safely get promoted, avoiding stalemate, and then, as we learned in a previous lesson, can reach checkmate in several more moves. However, this takes a bit longer than promoting the pawn to a rook in our initial position, which is followed by checkmate right on the next move. Let's move on to another interesting position, where white has to be very careful. The obvious move, capturing the queen, would be a mistake, because it would lead to a lost pawn endgame. Now black has a dangerous pass pawn that's about to get promoted in just 2 moves, so the king needs to run. But the problem is that after this position, the white king needs to move out, and then the black pawn will get promoted to a queen and win the game. Let's go back to the starting position again, and white has an amazing escape thanks to the help of a stalemate. And that move is moving the king to d1. Amazing move, leaving the rook hanging on e3. Because after queen takes rook, again the white king has no move. The game is stalemate, ending in a draw. But you may ask what happens if black does not capture that rook. True, king d4 is a better attempt, but then already the rook will capture the queen, and after king captures rook, the white king arrives to block that pawn at an earlier stage, and this is a draw because after white playing carefully after this position, this time with black to move, not white, black can only hang on to his pawn by moving the king to b3, creating stalemate therewith and ending a game in a draw. And let's see our next example, which is a very important rook versus pawn endgame. Here, black is about to promote the pawn to a queen, so white needs to be careful what to do. One of the most tempting moves looks like moving the rook to c2, pinning black's pawn on g2. Now the pawn cannot advance because that would leave the black king under attack, and that's not allowed by the rules of chess. However, this move is a big mistake. It gives black the opportunity to save the game, to escape with the help of stalemate. Now the correct move for black is to move to the corner with the king, so when the rook captures the pawn, the game is stalemate again and black escaped. Giving a check now on c1 wouldn't help either because the black pawn would promote and interpose the check. The correct way here for white to win the game is to give a check on h4, force the black king in front of his own pawn, then play rook g4, attack the pawn from the other side, and if now black tries the same trick, moving to the corner, hoping that white would capture the pawn creating stalemate, they'd be disappointed because white can still win by moving the king to f2, guarding the promotion square a second time. So if black would now promote the pawn, white could simply capture the newly born queen. And in other case, if the king moves to h2, then white can, besides capturing the pawn, just checkmate right away with rook to h4. A very instructive example. And let's see 3 more very cute examples when there is not yet a stalemate situation, but one side can force the other, the weaker side can force the side with the material advantage to create a stalemate. Here we go. In this position, black is up a whole queen, which seems to be like a tremendous advantage that it's only a matter of time when white will lose the game. Nevertheless, white has a pretty escape. If you want to hope for a stalemate, you cannot have any piece that can have plenty of moves. Like for example, this bishop right now on a4. In addition to the king also having several escape squares, the bishop has 7 different moves. But with just one move, giving up that bishop, checking black's king, and at the same time attacking the queen. So if the black king would move out of the check, white would simply capture the black queen and equalize the balance. On the other hand, when the queen captures the bishop, again the game is stalemate. What a pretty escape. In this position, it's a similar task that black can achieve, being down significantly in material. White has a queen, while black only has a rook. In addition, white is also threatening to checkmate along the a file. But black, again, similar to the very last example, can give a check that attacks the white king and queen. And when the queen captures the rook, again, the queen takes away the only previously free escape square of the black king. Again, the game is stalemate. And the final position, a pawn endgame. In pawn endgames, typically, even just one extra pawn is enough to win the game. Not here. White here has a pretty escape. At the moment, the white king still could move to e5, but if he would do that, he would slowly but surely lose the game. On the other hand, white has an elegant sacrifice by advancing his pawn, trying to promote it, because now when the black pawn captures on f6, that pawn took away that only escape square that the white king had on the last move, and again ending the game in stalemate. Well, I hope you enjoyed these very instructive examples on stalemate, and next time when you'll be much ahead, you'll be a bit cautious. Make sure you avoid stalemate, because remember, when the game ends in stalemate, the game ends in a draw, and you don't want that to happen when you're much ahead. Thank you so much for listening, and be back next week. Bye-bye until then.